Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to A Heart Poured Out. If this is your first time, welcome. I am so excited that you joined us today. And A Heart Poured Out is a place to uplift, encourage, and give hope. I personally know what it's done for me to hear someone share their experiences and just share their story, and just knowing that somebody else has gone through something similar that I have, and if they can get through that, then I can too. And it's just really encouraged me and just given me hope to just continue to just push through the hard times. And so today I'm actually going to be sharing my personal story, my testimony. And actually a few years back I wrote a poem of my testimony, and reason being is because I'm the type of person, I'm just all up in my thoughts. There's always a million things going on in my mind, and sometimes you just need to sort through that. You need to make space in your mind and to be able to just think about day-to-day things. And so what I like to do is I like to write. And by writing, what I mean is I like to type things up because I have really bad handwriting. I have like a 7-year-old boy, chicken scratch. And so I won't be able to read back to myself or even to others what it is that I wrote. So I personally like to type. So writing can be different ways. It's not just like handwriting. I just want to be clear and open and transparent about how it is that I write. I like to type things up. But anyways, so a few years back I wrote a poem of my testimony, and I just want to share this with you guys. And without further ado, here it is. The poem is called Another Statistic. To many, I'm just another statistic, but to me, it's all too realistic. Just another girl who was raped with nowhere to escape. Only 4 years old and already in the 44%. But how could this be? I was just so innocent. A naive little girl who trusted her uncle. Come to find out, all he wanted was to unbuckle. Keeping quiet for 20 years, can you imagine how many tears? Always looking for someone to love when I should have been looking right above. Got married, started a new life, holding it down, being a good wife. Giving the Lord everything I had. So why was my marriage going so bad? I have found myself on my knees day and night. I have refused to lose this fight. But we all know it's His will and not our own. So I continue to seek His throne. And that's when I fell into the 50% divorce, a word I highly resent. But you know what? Forget how I felt, for my faith is in God and not in man. So I continue to walk out His divine plan. So I realized, you know what? I didn't really lose. God had finally become my muse. So no, I'm not just another statistic. Don't you know He was building my characteristic? He said, focus on me and you will be redeemed. Don't be ashamed or embarrassed. Don't you know that you're an heiress? So as you can see, I've gone through some really hard times in my life, and I just want to give you guys a little background before I dig into detail of like what that looked like. And so when I was younger, I was actually raised Catholic, and in 2013 is when I started going to a Christian church and just really gave my life to Christ and started to really have a relationship with God, and even just knowing that I could have a relationship with Him and talking to Him. And so when I was younger and I was 4 years old and I was going through this, it's amazing that I can even remember some of these things, but I just naturally have a photographic memory, and I believe that God had a purpose for that. And so, what happened was that we had an uncle that lived with us, and my family has just always been very welcoming. If you know them, my mom just makes everyone a part of the family. And so, what happened was that he was living with us, and he was doing things to me and having me do things to him, and I'm not really understanding like what was happening, but this went on for some time. And I remember my parents always telling me to not go over to, because he lived in this little trailer right outside our house, and we all had our own rooms inside our home. And so I just remember my mom always telling me, to not go over there by myself, to not be alone. But they've just always naturally protected me and my brothers that way, that, they would tell us, to me it felt like every day. It probably was every once in a while, but to me it felt every day thinking back. But, my mom has always told us, don't let anybody touch your private parts. To me personally, since I'm a girl, she would tell me, don't climb all over people, don't sit on other men's laps. Like, they've just always been very protective, never let me stay the night at people's houses. It wasn't until high school when they first let me stay the night at a girlfriend's house, and it was only because she lived just with her mom. So, my parents have been really strict. I'm full Mexican, so, my family has just always been strict and just very disciplined and just very protective, especially me being the youngest and only girl. So you can only imagine how much my family protected me. But what happened was that I felt like as this was happening to me, there was a moment where God was like, okay, that's enough. And it's like I all of a sudden knew that what was happening, what was going on was wrong. It just didn't feel right. You know, it got to a point where like he was bribing me to do things that I didn't want to do. So I felt like something kind of clicked, like, okay, this isn't right. Like, I shouldn't be doing this. So, you know, I stopped being left alone with him. And so this is something that I just kept a secret for so long because I was scared. I had fear. And, you know, that just at a young age, like how, like you can't even understand or wrap your mind around what's really happening. And so I just found myself just keeping quiet because I was, you know, ashamed and embarrassed. And like I said, like you're so young that you don't even know what those feelings are, but you know it don't feel good. And so I just never said anything, and I just stopped, you know, putting myself in that situation. And so what happened was that, you know, he had moved out, and then there was a time where I think it was a few years later, he had came back to the house to visit. And you know, I'm just a girl in my room playing with my toys, and I heard the doorbell ring. So I ran outside of my room and I went to the hallway to go see who was there, and I saw my mom open the door and it was him. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I just felt so much hate. I was upset and I was mad, and I just ran back into my room, and I didn't come out my room until he left. And so you know, that was that situation. And then as I'm getting older, it wasn't until maybe like middle school that I realized what had really happened to me, because I was so young to even understand what was going on. But it wasn't until I was in a health class that when they're talking about sex and, you know, rape and date rape drugs and all of that, it's like a light bulb turned on, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's what happened to me. I was raped, I was molested. And so I had such a hard time with this. And, you know, I remember even in high school, it's kind of when I first started telling a few of my closest friends what it was that I was going through, because I felt like it was something that I kept quiet for so long, and it was almost like a cry out, like somebody hear me out, like what do I do with this information, like this is something that I went through, like what do I do now, you know? And so I told a few friends, and I remember even once in an English class in high school, I wrote this story about a girl that I had met, and that she told me these things that had happened to her. And I ended that story with saying, unfortunately, that little girl was me. And this was in an English class, and the teacher like just graded my paper and gave it back. I don't know if he thought I was making it up or what, but you'd think that he'd call like Child Protective Services or something, but he didn't. And so I was just like, okay, well, whatever. Like that was kind of like, I feel like subliminally my way of like crying out for help. But nothing went about that. And so around that time in high school is when I decided that, you know what, I'm just gonna keep quiet about it, and I'm just not gonna tell my family until I get married. Because in my mind, my thought process was that, you know what, if I just wait until I'm married to tell my family, then, you know, life would have turned out okay for me. Like, you know, I'd be living a happy life. And so if I tell my parents when I'm married, it won't hurt them as bad, because they're like, well, like she got through it, she's happy, she's married, she's living her life, like, you know, it's fine. I don't know why I thought that, but now thinking back, it's like that was just the enemy trying to keep me quiet and trying to keep me hostage and bondage of what it is that I went through. Like to keep a secret that big was really hard. Just a lot of different thoughts and emotions going through internally. Just the shame and the guilt that I felt, because I almost felt like it was my fault. And then the fact that I kept quiet for so long also made me have this fear that like, well, if you tell them now, they're gonna be upset. They're gonna be, you know, mad at you because you didn't tell them sooner. And so, you know, this is something that I just like dealt with. And, you know, as I got older, you know, I got married at one point, and right after I got married is when I started going to church, to a Christian church. And I remember my first day being there. They announced this event that was for women that had dealt with sexual and domestic violence. And so in my heart, I was just like, I have to be there. Like, I need to go to this. Something in me just knew that, like, I had to go to this event. And so, you know, a few months later, I went to this event, and this woman shared her story and shared her testimony of what she went through. And similar situation as me, she, you know, had dealt with rape. And just hearing her story and just seeing the freedom that she had just blessed me so much. And I remember afterwards going up for prayer, and I was crying. Like, I had tears on my face. I couldn't even talk. I didn't even say anything to this woman. I just went up to her, and I just literally sat there. I stared at her in her eyes and just cried, and she just prayed over me. And I just felt this freedom, and I just felt this weight lifted off. And I just knew that was the beginning of my journey to be able to get through this. And I knew that eventually I was going to, you know, have to tell my family about this. And so that was the beginning of my healing process through that. And, you know, to kind of rewind back a little bit, before I got married, my uncle had reached out to my family, and he had called my dad. And this was while I was engaged. And he called my dad, and he asked him, hey, I just wanted to know if you ever filed a police report on me, because I think he was applying for some job or something. I don't really exactly remember what it was, but I didn't know their exact conversation. But he was just wanting to know if, like, you know, there was anything on his criminal record. And so my mom, wise woman that she is, I remember her asking me, she was like, hey, do you remember your uncle so-and-so? And I was like, no, who is he? But internally, I was just like, oh my gosh, I'm not ready. Like, I'm not married yet. I'm only engaged. I'm not married yet. It's not part of my plan. It doesn't fit in. But she tells me, she's like, did he ever do anything to you? And so I just played it off, and I was just like, no, I don't even remember him. Who is he? Like, you know? And so it was that fear that just kept me quiet. It just, like, it was almost like fear just came in like this and just kept me shut, kept my mouth shut. Like, I couldn't get it out. That was an opportunity for me to tell her, and I just couldn't do it. And so anyways, so I go to this women's event. I know that I'm, you know, I'm feeling more free about this, knowing that, like, oh my gosh, other people have gone through this too. I mean, obviously other people go through it, but I never got to, like, tangibly feel and talk to somebody that had gone through this. And so, and not only gone through it, but overcame that. So that's the other key point, is that they overcame this. So for them to be able to speak from a place of experience, from a place of victory, that really spoke to me. So, you know, I started beginning this healing process, and, you know, I was like, okay, I need to eventually tell my family, you know, all this and that. And so I'm just, like, growing in my faith. I'm, like, learning how to hear the voice of God. And the reason I laugh is because I legit thought that hearing the voice of God meant that, like, I was gonna hear a manly voice talk to me. So I used to be scared to pray by myself, but eventually I learned that, you know, God speaks to you in different ways. So, you know, I really started to pray and just really started to get into worship and just, you know, getting to know God more. But as I'm growing in my faith, my marriage had hit rock bottom. And I just could not understand what was going on and what was happening. And it was just a really hard season in my life that, like, I just couldn't wrap my mind around what was happening. I'm like, God, like, I'm finally giving my life to you. I'm living and chasing a life after you, and all this is happening. Like, what is going on? But I knew that I had to just continue to focus on God, because he would never leave me nor forsake me. He would never do anything to harm me. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to keep trusting, and I'm going to keep seeking you during this hard time. And eventually me and my ex-husband got a divorce, and in that season I prayed like no other. I was hurt, I was broken, and but I knew that seeking God would give me peace, would give me joy, because that's what his word says, that he would give us peace that surpasses all understanding. And let me tell you, I have felt that peace and that joy. I remember there being times where I was just so broken and hurt, and I would just lift my hands up in surrender and just be all in on worship, and just talking to God and just praying to him and just asking him to heal me, to restore me, and just telling him honestly that I was hurting. And I just felt this peace and this joy. And I remember my pastor's wife at the time looking at me, and she would tell me, just, you could just see the pain, because there was many people that went through the season with me, and just they saw the pain and the suffering that I went through. And I just remember her seeing me with just so much pain in her face. She was like, "How are you doing?" And I was just like, I'm good, like, and she was like, "You always say that." And the thing is that, like, she felt my pain, but also at the same time I was able to feel God's joy, his peace that surpasses all understanding, because I knew that focusing on him was going to help me get through this. Focusing on my circumstances was just going to create worry, was just going to create fear, was just going to create more turmoil inside of me. But focusing on God, remaining my focus on him, I was able to get through this. So it was just so important for me to have people in my life that I can reach out to in those weak moments where I was just really feeling in my feelings. Like I said, I'm human, so I have emotions. Like, yeah, I know to seek God and to talk to him, but at the end of the day, that doesn't, like, I know what my word says. I know what God can do and what he's capable of, but it doesn't change the fact that I have feelings, I have emotions. So in those times, I'm able to redirect those, because thankfully I have people in my life that when I am too weak to pray for myself, they're praying for me. I can reach out to them and I'm like, "Look, I just really need to be encouraged right now. I really just need some prayer. Like, can you pray for me? Like, can you just give me an encouraging word?" And so, as I'm going through all of this, I felt compelled to tell my oldest brother. He was at the time going to the same church as me, and as I'm going through my divorce, and just going through that whole process of, like, separating from my husband and all of that, I remember going out to do dinner with my brother, and we were on the car ride back home, and I just felt like Holy Spirit tell me, like, it's time, tell him. And so I was just like, in my mind, I'm like, oh my God, like, I'm going through all this hurt because my marriage is ending. It's shipwrecked, like, you know what I mean? And so I'm like, how can I tell him this other tragedy that I've been through, So I was obedient, and I told my brother, I was like, "Hey, I just want to let you know that, Uncle so-and-so, he raped me and this and that, like, whatever." And so that whole thing was a process too. So, as I'm going through my divorce, here I am telling my family about what I had gone through. So, I told my oldest brother, and then I have brothers that are twins, and we had like a little sibling meeting. And so my brothers had came over to my place at the time, and I couldn't say it, so my brother told, the twins on my behalf that, that had happened. And so we had our own little discussion about that. And then, fast forward to this time where I had already, started the process of my divorce legally. I was living with my parents, and my brothers decided to have, family meetings so that we can tell my parents that I had gone through this. And so, I remember having that family meeting, and again, my brothers told my parents for me, because it was just too hard for me to tell them. Because again, like I said, I'm the youngest and only girl, and they were always protective of me. And I just kind of already knew how they were going to feel when we told them. And so that just was going to break my heart. And so, we told my parents, my brothers told my parents, and, broke their hearts. We all had, our family moment. But you know, not only was I going through a healing process, but my family went through a healing process with that too, you know. And I just want to share that end of it because, you know, people always talk about them going through a rape, and what we fail to understand is that our families deal with that too. This is something that, you know, my brothers had to get through too, and my parents had to get through. You know, my parents had to deal with feeling that it was their fault. You know, that's something that my dad said, but I'm like, no, it wasn't your fault. You know, it was nobody's fault but the person that did it. You know what I mean? Like, you can't control somebody else's actions. Like, you know, like, they literally did the best they could to protect me. They did everything that they could to prevent this from happening. Like I said, as far as like not even letting me stay the night at people's houses, they literally, you know, warned me in the sense of like telling me not to allow anybody to touch my private parts and, you know, all of that. And you know, without letting me go to people's houses and just always keeping a close eye on me. They literally did everything they could, but this still happened to me. And the thing is that, like I said, like, it ain't about you. It's always for somebody else. So me going through a rape, me going through this divorce that, you know, just crushed my heart, it wasn't about me. It was for somebody else. It was for you. It was so that you knew that you can get through this too. It was so that you knew that there is hope. There's a light at the end of the tunnel. And if I could stand here as a representation of being the light at the end of the tunnel, then so be it. But you know who's really the true light? Is Jesus. It's because of him that I was able to get through this. It's because I was able to focus on him. And I had people in my life that when I was too weak, I can reach out to them to encourage me, to uplift me, and it gave me so much hope. But at the end of the day, I knew to seek God first. Yeah, I can reach out to people and my friends that were there for me, but at the end of the day, it's because I had my own personal relationship with God that I was able to get through that he was able to reach down and pull me close, because in my weakness, he was my strength. And it was nothing but his grace that brought me through everything that I've been through. Because let me tell you, being 4 years old and going through a rape and having to go through 20 years of my life without talking about it, without having somebody to help me through that, that is so hard. But that just shows you God's grace and his mercy. That even though I didn't have a relationship with him, I was still his daughter. And he allowed me to get through that and protected me. His protection was over me. And here I am on the other end of the tunnel, being able to be a light for you, to help you get through that. And I'm not saying that I'm the light, but it's because of him that I'm his vessel, that I'm just here to redirect back to him, okay? It's not even about me, but it's about him. So anyways, I don't want to take any more of your time. I'm so excited and glad that you tuned in today. Look forward to more of these videos that I can just continue to share more of me and just what God's done in my life. Please share, subscribe, comment, like, whatever it is that you want to do. And even if you don't, just know that I love you, God loves you, and thanks so much for watching. Love you guys.